This is part 9 of my American road trip series, in which I'm narrating one scary story from every US state. Make sure to check the other episodes out after this one. It's hard to believe we're almost at the finish line. Still, there's plenty more horror just over the horizon, so make sure to buckle up as we continue on our journey down Route 666. The speed painting visuals used in this episode were created by Victoria Skeller. Links to her YouTube channel and Instagram can be found in the description. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, born and raised, and I have my own story to share here. One that's equal parts bizarre and disturbing. Around 4 years ago, I was walking through one of the local parks early in the morning, well before anyone else was up and awake. I'd just broken up with my long-term girlfriend and was having difficulty sleeping. As I strolled through the empty park, I heard something that caught my attention. A soft whimpering. Sheltered under a tree on my left was a dog, a black Labrador to be precise. The poor thing must have gotten lost, I thought. I leant down to pet the little guy, and his tail immediately started wagging like crazy. He licked my hand and made it clear that, like me, he was in need of a friend. No collar, nor anything else to suggest he had an owner. What was he doing out here all by himself? Had somebody kicked him out? Was he a stray? I stood up and walked a few steps to look around for his owner, but the dog wouldn't leave me alone. He was like my shadow. Wherever I walked, he followed. Together, we walked the length and breadth of that park. Occasionally, I called out, "Hello? Hello? I have your dog here." But there was nobody around at all. No one was looking for the poor fella. I looked down at him and stared into his big brown eyes, a pair that said, "Please, take me with you." It seemed like the universe had thrown the two of us together. This dog was the answer to my newfound loneliness, and I was the answer to his. I took him home with me. For a long time, I did my best to track down his owner. I reported the dog as missing and put up flyers around town, but nobody ever got in contact with me. It looked like I'd found myself a new canine housemaid. I named him Scooby. Creative, I know. Every morning, I'd take Scooby for a long walk. The first week I had him, we walked the exact same route around town. Thing is, every time we came to pass this one particular house, Scooby would stop and start crying. I'd try and pull him away, try to get him to keep going, but he'd just stare at the house and whine like crazy. Each time we came to pass that house, it'd take me a good 10 minutes to get him to continue on with me, tugging on his leash the entire time. After the 6th or 7th time we passed that house, it became clear to me that he was going to do this every time. So, in the end, I just decided to switch up our walking route. I had no idea what got into him, or why that house seemed to bother him so much. It wasn't like he was crying to go inside. He never tugged on his leash to get closer. It was more like he was afraid of something in there, but couldn't bring himself to leave, like a human who can't look away from a deadly accident. He had some sort of strange, doggy fascination with the place. Anyway, for the next 6 months I owned Scooby, I took him on several different walking routes, making sure that we never passed that damn house that freaked him out so much. One day though, I had an early morning errand to run, which took me past that house. I decided to take Scooby along with me, get his daily walk out of the way, completely forgetting about how he acted 6 months earlier. Well, Scooby hadn't forgotten about that house. Not by a long shot. As we came to pass it, he once again froze in place and refused to move. He whimpered loudly, refusing to take his eyes off the place. "Come on, Scoob, there's a good boy," I said to him, trying to calm him down and coax him along a bit. It didn't work. He seemed more unsettled by that house than he ever had been before. "Hey, what's gotten into you, boy?" I asked him rhetorically. He must have stayed like that for a good 15 minutes this time, just staring and crying, refusing to budge. Then, without warning, he bolted towards the house, pulling his leash right out of my hands. "Scooby!" I shouted. "Get back here!" It was no use. Whatever fear had consumed him before, he had conquered it. He rushed to that house, ran around the corner and into the backyard. God damn it, Scooby, I thought. The owners must have a cat or something. That's why he always acts crazy around here. I chased Scooby into the house's backyard, completely embarrassed, praying that I could get him out of there before the owners woke up and started cussing me out. I got back there and found Scooby frantically digging a hole in the grass. I'd never seen him acting like this before. He never dug holes in my backyard. I tried to pull him away, but he just shook me off and kept digging, his little paws throwing up earth left, right, and center. I was furious with him. But, you see, Scooby knew something I didn't. Knew a secret that nobody else knew. He knew what was buried in that yard. His former owner. Scooby's digging unearthed the largely decomposed corpse of a 32-year-old man, shallowly buried in the garden of your average suburban house in North Carolina. The man had been down there for as long as I'd had Scooby. The authorities were alerted, and an investigation began. Turns out the house was a rental. The dead man had been living there with his girlfriend and their dog. All their neighbors and their friends in the area knew them as Jim and Charlotte. These turned out to be fake identities. Everything people thought they knew about their lives and their pasts were a lie. The inside of their house remained untouched. Nothing appeared to have been taken. As of right now, the police still haven't been able to track down the so-called Charlotte. She remains the prime suspect for his killing, though nobody's really sure if she was behind it all and went on the run, or if she herself was a victim too, buried somewhere else by somebody else. If she was responsible, then she left in a damn hurry, as pretty much all her personal possessions were still inside the house. Her wallet, her fake ID, everything but her cell phone. Whatever the case, no one has ever come forward to reveal either Jim or Charlotte's real identities. No friends, no family, no one. As such, Jim was reburied here in Nashville and given an unnamed headstone. The strangest part in my eyes is that the house's rent was still being paid when the body was found, despite the fact it had been empty for 6 months. The landlord had always been paid in cash, which arrived in an envelope through the mail. It was always addressed from Jim, even after his demise. So, the question is, who was still paying the rent? Charlotte, the girlfriend? Someone else who didn't want the new tenants to be digging around in the garden? That all remains unclear. I'm sure there are details the cops haven't revealed to the public, but still, it's a little weird. Scooby is still around to this day. He still cries whenever we go past that house, but he doesn't stop and stare anymore. In his own way, I like to think he found a little closure. I don't know how his last owner treated him or what he was like, but Scooby didn't want to leave him down there in the ground. He's a good boy. I'll update you all if they ever find the woman. I've been listening to your YouTube channel and stories for a long time now, and I have one I'd like to share that happened to my parents a little before I was born. Many people in America aren't too familiar with my little state of Vermont, up in the northeastern corner, tucked between New York and New Hampshire. Even fewer are familiar with the portion of land in the southern part, known as the Bennington Triangle. This stretch of land has been home to 1 or 2 settlements, but is more famous for its unexplained mysteries, mass disappearances, unknown creatures, and evil spirits. Even the local Native American tribes say they'd never set foot there, as they believe the land is cursed. My grandparents owned a house right on the edge of Glastonbury Mountain, which is one of the supposed points of the Bennington Triangle. My grandfather had talked about unusual happenings in his many years of living there, but nothing is as chilling or bold as what happened to my father one summer day in 1980. It started out as any other hot summer day in August. My older sister was just turning 1 at the time, and my parents decided to have a birthday party for her at my grandparents' house, since my parents lived in a small apartment at the time, and my grandparents had a very large backyard to host the party. When it came time to serve the cake, my mother rushed about in the kitchen, looking for a cutting board or some other flat utensil to serve the large cake on. Alas, all of the boards she found were far too small. She hurried down to the basement, where my grandmother kept a lot of old kitchen gadgets and supplies. Perhaps there was a large cutting board of some sort down there. As my mother searched the dimly lit basement, she came across a corner where my grandparents stacked all of their board games for game nights. One of the game boxes stuck out more than the others. It looked brand new. When my mum read the title, she kind of froze in bewilderment for a second. It was a brand new, never before used copy of the game Ouija. Why would the old folks have a Ouija board? Maybe they were using the box to store something else. Letting her curiosity take over, my mother grabbed the game from the shelf and pulled off the top. A brand new Ouija board stared back at her. At this point, her bewilderment of finding such an item diminished and was replaced with a thought. This board is the right shape and size to hold the cake. She was right. There were no creases in the middle like most game boards, and this particular model of the game used a very strong board, not flimsy cardboard. She started up the stairs, Ouija board in tow. Once in the kitchen, my mum looked around for some tinfoil. She wasn't about to serve a cake to guests with a Ouija board fully staring back at them. Finding the foil, she wrapped the board up well, taking great effort to make sure all of the numbers and letters were covered. Slowly and skillfully, she slid the birthday cake on top of it, stuck in the birthday candles, and went outside and joined everyone. My father was standing with an old Polaroid camera in front of my grandmother, who was holding my sister, waiting for the cake. As my mum took out a lighter and lit the candles, a red light on the Polaroid began flashing. My father fiddled with the camera. That's odd, he exclaimed. I could have sworn I put fresh batteries in this thing. I have a brand new package on my dresser upstairs, my grandfather said. Oh, okay, I'll go get him. Be right back. With that, my father ran into the house. Just then, a breeze began to wisp up, and the bright sun ducked behind some very, very dark clouds. Looking up, my grandparents and my mum started to pout. Great, looks like rain. My mother, who was born in New York City, was a tad puzzled by this sudden shift in weather, but my grandparents, being native Vermonters, weren't fazed at all. After all, the saying goes, if you don't like the weather in Vermont, just wait a minute. Regardless, everybody thought it was best to move the celebration indoors. Once everybody was situated around the large trench table in my grandfather's dining room, my mother was beginning to wonder where my father was with the camera. All of a sudden, just as the thought was still in her mind, my mother, along with everybody else at the party, heard a very loud, very scary. It had come from the upstairs bedroom. It was my father. "Steve!" my mother shouted. Without hesitation, she handed the birthday candles to my grandmother, ran into the hallway and up the stairs. My father was laying on his stomach, a mere foot from the edge of the landing, his face down. He looked semi-conscious. Oh my God, Steve, what happened? My mother stooped to his side to help him to his bottom. I must have tripped on something. Damn it. My father sat with his eyes slowly opening, his legs bent with his feet on the top stair. My mum looked behind him. There was nothing anywhere to trip on. The floor was completely immaculate, just the way my grandmother always had it. You all right? My mum began to help him to his feet. Yeah, I'm fine. My father was a 6'2" former Marine, 5 years fresh out of Vietnam. He fought and survived the siege of Khe Sanh and was a machine gunner on the front lines. He wasn't about to let a stumble dethrone his dignity. He finished standing on his own, shying from all my mother's aid. when, suddenly, he began contorting, twisting his shoulder blades back in an almost inhuman posture. "Oh, God! It burns! It burns!" My father started clawing at his t-shirt. His fingers gnarled and contorted in agony. Thinking he may have tweaked something in his fall, my mother, now horrified, helped him remove his shirt. What she saw terrified her to the bone. Between my father's painful convulsions, right in the middle of his shoulder blades, was a large, red boot print. Her rational mind tried to tell her that this was a reaction to a spider bite, but her eyes were showing her a more chilling picture. It looked like a man size 12 or 14, and there were tread marks, like actual tread marks. What kind of spider bite leaves tread marks? Someone, or something, tried to kick her husband down the stairs, narrowly missing the top of the landing by about 6 inches. Now, fully on his feet, the burning subsided, and as quickly as it came, the mark on his back disappeared. Both my parents took a minute to gather their thoughts before descending down to the party below. They kept their cool and played it off like nothing had happened. Immediately upon taking the picture of my 1-year-old sister with her cake, my mother slid the cake onto the table, cut it, served it, and then chucked the Ouija board, still wrapped in icing foil, out the back door and deep into the woods. After that, no other strange happenings ever occurred in that bedroom, and nobody said anything to my grandparents right up until the day that they both passed away. It wasn't until years later, when my sister was 10 and I was 8, that we were looking through the photo albums with my mother, and we came upon the Polaroid she snapped at the table that day. Behind my grandmother and 1-year-old sister was the faded silhouette of what appeared to be a tall man, standing over the two of them with his hands outstretched, as if about to grab them both. My mother removed the photo from its place in the book. How had she never seen that before? After we went to bed that night, she burned that picture outside in the trash barrel. This all took place in 1997. At the time, my girlfriend and I both lived near the Manistee River. We didn't live together though. We'd only been dating for a couple of months. Met each other at a local bar. One evening, I got a call from her at around 11 p.m. She sounded concerned on the phone. "Hey, Rick, could you come over to my place tonight?" I figured she was just in the mood for a little late-night action, if you know what I mean. "Sure, babe. Feeling a little frisky, huh?" No, it's not that. It's just that... Well, this is gonna sound ridiculous, but I think I saw some kind of wolf walking by my window. I mean, like, really walking. Like a werewolf or something. Well, I didn't want to laugh at her for what she had just said, but she was right. The whole thing did sound ridiculous. Still, I kept my judgment to myself, thinking she must have just watched a scary movie on TV or something. Freaked herself out a little bit. Being the reassuring boyfriend I was, I told her I'd be right over. I hopped in my truck outside and set off in the direction of her house. The drive took me about 15 minutes. My girlfriend lived out in the sticks a bit, in a house surrounded by woodland. A little too secluded for my taste, but hey-ho. I pulled off onto a road, which was flanked on both sides by tall trees that blocked out the moonlight. Luckily for me, my headlights were in great condition, and really lit up the whole road ahead of me. My truck comes creeping up on her house, and I turn the final corner to pull into her driveway. On full blast, my headlights light up the entirety of her house. Immediately, I see it. There, crouched in a bush by my girlfriend's front door, is what looks like a huge dog's head. That's all I can see protruding from the bush, only the dog's head, but the thing was big. I hit the brakes. As the light from my vehicle hits it, the head instantly spins around and looks dead at me with a pair of crazed, orange eyes. Without hesitating, the dog-like thing stands up on 2 legs, and I swear to Christ, its body is human. No doubt about it, and it's covered in scratch marks and sporadic patches of thick hair. The worst part was its size. The thing was huge, standing much taller than any man I'd ever met. It charged out of the bushes, running straight at my truck like it was coming to get me. It all happened so fast that I had no time to think. I just blasted the car horn and put my foot on the accelerator, aiming my vehicle right at the damn thing. The creature wasn't interested in playing chicken though. When it saw my tires begin to spin again, it bolted left, and in a flash, disappeared into the tree line. I didn't wait around to check if the coast was clear. Instead, instinct took over. I jumped out of my truck and ran to my girlfriend's door. I knocked hard, but there was no answer. My heart began to race, thinking what this thing might have done to her. I desperately called out her name. That did the job. The door opened, and my girlfriend greeted me with a smile as if nothing had happened. I asked if she was all right. She told me of course she was, that she was just a little spooked by what she saw earlier, the wolfman walking past her window, but that she was sure it was just her mind playing tricks on her. She obviously had no idea this creature was hiding outside her house. I wasn't gonna call you over here, she told me. It's late, and I know you have work in the morning, and I know you probably think I'm just being stupid, but I swear, after I saw the shape of the thing move past my window, I heard what sounded like whimpers outside my front door, like a dog crying to be let back inside. That's why she didn't immediately open the door for me, not until she heard my voice. I told her I didn't think she was being stupid. I told her about what I saw, about the dog-like thing hiding outside her house, waiting by her front door like some kind of damn punished pooch. Her face changed as I told her, became morbid and pale. I had to comfort her for a good few hours before she felt safe enough to fall asleep. In those hours, she asked me what I thought it was, but we both knew the answer to that already. See, there's a famous story in this part of the country about the Michigan dogman. A lot of different sightings floating around. I've heard more than my fair share from people, both young and old, male and female. Since that night, I have my own story to tell about it. Some of you might think this is a load of bull, but I know what I saw that night, and I for one am a believer now. When we were much younger, 16 or 17 I believe, my best friend James and I went out hiking in DeSoto Forest, Mississippi. It was 1985. School was on break, and the two of us decided it'd be fun to go on a camping trip out in those woods. We'd stocked up on supplies, got the best tent we could afford between us, and since James had a car, drove off one weekday afternoon. He parked up on the outskirts. We ventured deep into the forest, wanting to get as immersed into nature as possible. The two of us weren't exactly the most outdoorsy people in the world, so we wanted to make the most of the experience and really embrace the great outdoors. Learn from it, you know? As we were making our way along one of the trails, we heard people coming up around the corner ahead of us. We were real far into the woods now, and hadn't crossed paths with anyone for a good long while. It was still daylight out though, so we weren't too bothered. When the people up ahead finally came into view and got close to us, however, that all changed. It was like something out of the movie Wrong Turn. 4 real, hillbilly-looking boys, far bigger than us. You could tell from the noise they were making, the way they were dressed, and the way they carried themselves, that they were trouble. Mullets, wife-beaters, soulless eyes. A real bunch of lowlife and mouth-breathers. Must have only had 10 teeth between all 4 of them. They stopped as they came to pass us, obviously looking for trouble. They started insulting us, calling us all kinds of derogatory terms. We kept on walking without saying a word, scared they'd do something. One of them snorted up a loogie and spat at James. They all laughed as we speed-walked out of their sights and around the corner. "Arseholes," James said under his breath. He didn't dare say it loudly enough so that they could hear him. And that was a terrible experience that really put a dampener on the whole day, but we figured that was the last we'd see of those scumbags. They'd had their fun with us, and were heading off somewhere to cause more trouble. After a couple more hours of hiking, we found the spot where we'd planned to set up camp. After putting up our tent, we ate a little dinner. Then we chatted about life and the encounter with those lowlifes. Eventually it got dark, and we decided to turn in for the night. We got into our sleeping bags inside the tent, and after about an hour, we both drifted off to sleep. I was awoken in the middle of the night by some unusual sounds coming from outside. As the grogginess of sleep faded, I honed my ears on the noises. It wasn't any kind of nature sound or animal at all. It was quiet laughter and whispering, coming from somewhere outside of our tent. The voices were muffled and far off, but I was sure they were human. Still, I needed a second opinion. I shook James awake and told him to listen. He too could hear the distinctly human noises. "Oh crap," he whispered. "There's people out there for sure." We didn't say it right away, but I knew he was thinking the same thing as me, and that it was those 4 guys from earlier. "What are we gonna do?" I whispered to James. We had some wood carving knives with us, but that was about all we had for self-defense. James subtly unzipped the top of the tent entrance and peeked out into the blackness. "Definitely people," he said. "I can make out their silhouettes. It's them. All 4 of them. They're in the bushes, about 100 feet away, I'd say." He said it all in such a matter-of-fact way that it didn't sound like he was scared at all. But then he looked at me with an expression of total concern. "What are we gonna do? Just hope that they leave us alone?" I didn't know how to answer. They were obviously planning something, but how bad that thing was unknown. We were outnumbered, outsized, and in unfamiliar territory in the dark. My heart was beating double time. "Let's go. Let's just get out of here and go," I said. We sat looking at each other, debating what the best course of action was. Then, whoosh, something flew in through our tent. It pierced right through it and stuck in the ground no more than 3 inches from me. It was a goddamn arrow, sticking up in the ground. This was no joke. These guys were psychos.
We got one!
We heard them screaming and laughing like a pack of animals outside.
Hit him again! Hit him again!
That was it. We tore open the tent entrance and flew out into the forest, leaving all of our stuff behind. We heard the men howling like wolves on the hunt, pursuing us. God knows how close behind us they were. The 2 of us didn't look back. We sprinted deep into those woods, completely disoriented and filled with fear. At one point, James grabbed me and threw me down into a small ditch alongside him. He held me down. "Shh, don't move," he whispered. I obeyed his command. He always knew how to take control, much more of a leader than I ever was. We stayed hidden down in that ditch for hours. I don't know how many exactly. Neither of us had a watch, and time lost all its structure. All I know is we laid low until daybreak. Then, with the light on our side once again, we slowly and cautiously made our way back out of the forest. It took what felt like forever, but eventually we made it back to James's car. The vehicle had been completely trashed. The tires had been slashed, the doors pried open, the insides gutted, looted and soiled. The outside was scratched to all hell, with a few holes put in it for good measure. This is one of those rare cases where hitchhiking actually saved the day. We were able to hitch a ride with a stranger back to civilization. Of course, we told our families about the experience, and ended up contacting the authorities too. They were concerned, but not surprised. Other people had contacted them about a violent and abusive group in those woods before, but they'd never taken things this far. Well, let me rephrase that. Nobody had ever reported something this extreme. That doesn't mean those mouth-breathing sons of bitches didn't end up hitting one of their targets. Bit hard to report something with an arrow through your heart, you know. The cops searched the area where we'd set up our camp. Our stuff had all been taken, obviously. They didn't find the arrow stuck in the ground in our tent. I guess the hillbillies took it back when they searched it. What the cops did find, though, was another arrow stuck in a tree, right by where we ran into the forest. They'd fired off another shot at us as we ran from them. Luckily, it didn't hit us. James and I never went back to DeSoto again. Never went camping again, for that matter. If the cops ever caught those 4 guys, we never heard anything about it. This one isn't for the weak of stomach amongst you. I'll describe the incident and all its details, but be warned, this wasn't a pretty sight. A few years back, I worked as a first responder out in Oklahoma. A call came through one night about a traffic incident, a hit and run. Apparently, a cyclist had been struck by a vehicle, and things looked pretty bad. Somebody had seen the whole thing and called it in, but said it was probably too late already for the guy. If it wasn't, then it would be real soon. They were doing what they could at the scene. We rushed to their location, knowing that time was of the essence. We came down a quiet country road, trees lining both sides, and sure enough, up ahead in our headlights, we could see 2 distressed people and a third person lying in the road by a mangled bicycle. I rushed out to help, but instantly I knew the guy on the road was gone. He wasn't wearing a helmet, and blood and brain juices had leaked out all over the road. His limbs were broken and contorted at unnatural angles. There was a long smear of dark red where his torso had slid along the ground, turning the front of his shirt into a bloody rag and completely tearing off all the skin on his body and face. He must have been hit at some speed. I knelt down to see what I could do, though it was obvious to both me and my partner that this was not a survivable accident. I checked for a pulse, just to be sure, but really this was all just procedure. Just as everyone expected, I couldn't find a pulse. I got up to face my partner, who was doing his best to calm the 2 people who had stopped to help. My back was to the man lying lifeless in the road. I told my partner that there was nothing we could do for the guy, even though I'm sure he already knew that. He says something back to me, but mid-sentence, he abruptly stopped talking. His eyes got real large, as if he had just had the shock of his life. He was looking at something behind me. I turned to look too. Standing there was the injured man, though I have no idea how he was still breathing or able to stand. His head was split open. His face was gone. It was all just red. The only thing distinguishing him as human were the 2 wide, white eyes. They were filled with confusion and fear. Before anyone had a chance to help him or even speak to him, the injured man ran off the road into the woods at full speed. We couldn't catch up with him. We called the incident in, and a search for the injured man got underway immediately. They never found him. His body was never discovered in the woods. Never has been. He was never reported by any of the hospitals. Nobody in the local community said that they'd seen a severely injured man running around town. For all intents and purposes, he simply vanished somewhere in those woods. Judging by his injuries, there was no way he could have gotten far. Still, he was never seen again. Never reported missing by his family, wherever they were. I know this must all have a logical explanation, and the man just ran off because he was dazed and confused from his injuries. Still, to this day, I have no idea where he went, where his body disappeared off to, or why he was never found. The fact that he was able to regain consciousness and run after the damage he sustained defies belief. Then again, Adrenaline's a hell of a thing. Gave me the shock of my life. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Well, I'm finally back from Japan now, and should be back to making videos way more regularly than before. Yeah, it's a lot easier when I'm here in England, believe me. But yeah, my last video that I put out while I was out there, it actually got a really good reception. The one about Japanese urban legends. So I was thinking about turning that into a series as well. One where I talk about folklore and urban legends and stories like that from different parts of the world. You know, Scandinavia, the Philippines, anywhere else that you guys might be interested in, I don't know. Could be fun once this series is over, which looks like it's going to be very soon. Wow, episode 9 out of 10. The journey's almost over. Sad times. Once again, a huge shout out to Victoria Skeller for the awesome digital painting she created. I think it turned out really great, so make sure to check out her Instagram and YouTube channel via the links down below in the description. Such an amazing artist. Make sure to tell her Lazy sent you. A huge thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters, Sloane Crawford, Sarah Ramirez, Victor Javier Fonseca Ruiz, Maricruz Cedano, AnimeWimp, Crazy MaskParade, James Labour, ProCupidineNata, Gina Valera, Philip Westre, Alex Greensall, Monica Mendoza, Crawford K. MacDonald, Marley Wright, Ray Price Burton, Mitchell Herrera, Nadine, Darius Saffaie, Joshua Lindsey, DannyElk, Kelly Rocco, Madison Reinhart, and Sakis Lioliosidis. That was all I want to say, but yeah, thanks for supporting me, man. I appreciate it. If you too would like to support me on Patreon, you can find a link to mine down below in the description. Anyway guys, that about does it from me. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again in the next one. Until then, you will stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.